We have people actively involved in doing what needs to be done for the party from the grassroots up. Revolutions may start at the top, but they only succeed because of the bottom. Keep expanding. Your job is not to be content with having a dinner like this every year. You ought to be content only if this dinner is bigger next year. You shouldn't be content with the local campus Republicans being, 50 hardy souls. Incidentally, the president of the Goucher Campus Republicans who got me to come and speak to the campus is here. Where is she? Where is she standing? There she is, right there. Ellen came out and heard me speak, and she can tell you, this young lady didn't do herself any popularity contest by inviting Karl Rove, spawn of Satan, to speak at the Goucher campus. Thank you so much for doing so, though, because I had a lot of fun. And I certainly, if I didn't do anything else, I let every conservative kid on campus know they weren't alone. I had kids coming up to me afterwards saying, you know what, thanks for coming to our campus. I'm a Republican. I said, are you active in the campus Republican? They said, oh, no. I said, well, now you ought to be. Well, we ought to keep expanding our numbers. We're not going to win unless we grow. And political parties don't succeed if they become smaller and more select. They become successful if they become broader and bigger. And that means tolerating some people who don't necessarily agree with us on each and every opinion. And look, you may think you're a conservative, but you're in Maryland. You don't know conservative until you come to Texas. But just because I don't agree with you 100% of the time and you don't agree with me 100% of the time doesn't mean we don't share a lot in common, and that we share a lot more in common than we share with the people in the opposition party. But we ought to tolerate occasional differences. We ought to take on the important fights. Don't be sitting there saying, oh, well, we can't take on that because that's so controversial. What do you got to lose? People in this country and people in this state are crying out for leaders who will stand up and speak the hard truths about the big issues. Martin O'Malley says, oh, all we got to do to solve our problem is tax the rich. We got to speak up and say, you know what, Martin, you want to drive the people who are creating the jobs and people who are investing in our economy? If you want to drive them out of the state, go ahead and do so. But you're going to be hurting people by costing them jobs and opportunity, and you're going to be affecting the prosperity of the families as well as the prosperity of our state. And it's wrong and it's stupid and we shouldn't do it. And finally, we ought to be bold and we ought to be clear. It's not just enough to criticize the goofiness that goes on in Annapolis. It's not just enough to point out the sort of, weirdness of Governor O'Malley's position on many of the issues. I love the fact that the man is talking about running for president. Let me just tell you, we would be blessed as a party and as a nation if he did. He could be like the Howard Dean of 2016. He could leave the safe environments of Baltimore City and Annapolis and go out there and see what the real America's like. Let him go out there and say, let's tax everybody more. Let's spend everything we got. We're really concerned about the state and local government employees more than we are about the working men and working women. Let's say howdy doody to the unions. I want to see how far that goes. Even in the Democratic primary, they aren't that dumb. But we have to be bold and clear and concrete about what it is we're going to do. We've got to come up with optimistic and positive, constructive, conservative answers to the problems of our communities in your state. We have to be talking about things that will improve people's lives, create more opportunity, more jobs, and a better future for every single person in this state. So look, thanks for having me here tonight. I know advice is cheap, but I got to tell you, you can do it. I remember all those people who said, well, thanks for what you're doing, Karl, in Texas. Glad you came here. Came from the West, which is far more Republican than Texas, and it really, sorry you came to Texas where it's so heavily Democrat. We'll only win things occasionally, and things are gonna be tough, the Democrats won. I mean, you know, living in Austin, Texas, when I first moved there, it was like, you're a Republican? When did you get out of the hospital? You know, did you go to the rehab clinic for that? But it's possible, if men and women of conviction patiently go about the business of building a political movement. You won't win it all today, you won't win it all tomorrow. In fact, you'll take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But if you do it right and stay at the patient work of building a revolution, you can do it. Thanks for having me here tonight. I promised I'd answer Duck a couple of questions. You've got them over here. Alex has got them. Yeah, there we go.
Thank you, Karl Rove. It was great. Okay, we only have time for 2 or 3 because he's got to sign some books and get going. First one, what would you advise a first-time candidate like Dan Bongino?
Read chapter 4 of my book. I had a weird, when I wrote the book, I had this weird thing. I spent 1.5 years on it. It's like giving birth, only not as painful. And I wrote it, but I'd never seen the book. And I read it, and they were printing and stuff. And I got this messenger show up at my door. The next week, the book is supposed to come out, and a messenger shows up at my door. And I have to sign for the package. I won't leave it. I have to sign for it. And I open it up, and there's 1 copy of my book. First time I'd ever held it in my hands. And a note from my publisher saying, you're going to launch your book tour next week. That's sort of the baton death mark of March of the book tour. I had 110 cities in 90 days. I'd wake up and say, where am I? But I had the book, and my editor said, it would be useful, why don't you sit down and read the book? Because you may have forgotten some of the things you've written, and just sort of refresh your memory by sitting down and read the book before you go out on your book tour. And so I sat down that day and began to read it. And I finished it the next day, and I gotta say, it's a damn good read.